This video, I decided to reflect on some of my previous Kitbashes and show you some things I never got to record that I think are incredibly cool. Starting off with this amazing Primaris lieutenant that I did as part of a very large kill team project. I actually created around 10 different units. However, before I could finish the entire project, the new kill team actually replaced the previous one, and the entire thing now became illegal. It was quite disappointing and disheartening. However, I was left with some really interesting models that I put a lot of time into, and in the end, I was left with these models that I'll remember for quite some time, and more importantly, it got me to start kitbashing variety of units that previously I did not even consider, as I just always looked at miniatures as they had to come in the box and never considered making something better. Next up, we have this incredible looking Raven Guard that I based very closely in the Raven Guard Chapter Master. It combines so many different kits, however, I'm not sure how, but they actually did come together really well. It's incredibly disappointing that I didn't get to record the entire process, however, I just had such a blast making him. The suppressor is actually from the old Scout kit, the drum magazine is from the Intercessor kit, and majority of the miniature is just the Reaver combined with some Incursor bits. The helmet and the claw are actually from the Horus Heresy kit, and I'm kind of surprised the fact that they worked so well, especially given the fact that it's a Primaris model. Definitely an incredible kitbash, and something I'll be looking forward to painting. Next up, we have the Abomination, which is one of my oldest kitbashes, but at the same time, I can't even begin to explain what this thing is. It's a combination of just so many different bits that started off with this massive gun, and I just thought, you know what, that's not enough. I also need to give this guy some massive rocket launchers, and to make things even more interesting, make him a Black Templar. However, quite a few people mentioned that he actually would have made a much better Iron Hands. However, well, you know, he's a Black Templar, so let's get to the Purity Seals. The Purity Seals are essentially everywhere. There's one on the weapon, I put one on his leg, one on the rocket launcher, and one behind the model on the gun because I'm actually not sure if that even counts as a Purity Seal. However, I thought, you know what, this thing needs as many Purity Seals as we can because I'm quite certain without a very large amount of faith in the Emperor, this Gravis armor doesn't function at all. I also thought it'd be really cool to give this gun an ability to fire in its own. That's why I put a little skull in there, as if that's actually a servitor controlling the gun when this Templar is essentially busy with other things. For the base, I had this leftover Tyranid head that I thought created a very interesting thematic look to the miniature, not to mention creates a very awesome story that tells of a great battle that occurred right before this moment. This here is actually one of the first video kitbashes that I did on the channel, and it was meant to be a Black Templar Judiciar, as there were a sold out model for quite some time and I just couldn't get my hands on one. I'm quite satisfied with the way he turned out, and I don't think there's an inherent problem with the kitbash itself. However, I do think if I did slightly something different with the painting style, it could have worked a little bit better. In hindsight, I definitely regret not giving his sword a little bit of blue energy that I think would have really helped visually, and created an additional visual path for this model by essentially drawing the attention away from the model and giving you something else to look at to an otherwise essentially very simple Primaris with some extra bits on top of him. I'm usually not a big fan of going back to my previous models and repainting them. However, I feel like with this guy, I might make the exception and just add some of that little bit of energy that I think will help him quite a bit. Next up, we have this chapterless Black Shield. He's definitely my favorite out of the group, and I definitely regret not putting something underneath his staff. As time went by, it definitely bothered me more and more the fact that it's floating mid-air. However, at the time, I did have to make do with what I had, but I definitely feel like I should have put a Tyranid head underneath there. I think doing that would have been quite a simple fix and something that would have just helped the model visually and explained his posture and why that staff is currently in that position. Also helping tell the visual story similar to what I did with this Black Templar, but you know, it is what it is. And from the darkest corners come the Genestealers Space Marines. For these guys, I actually got an incredible suggestion from one of the comments where someone mentioned that doing a little bit of chipping essentially in the model to create the idea that the previous chapter is still visible would have added some more interest and told a much more interesting story as to what happened to these guys. I don't personally have a lot of experience with chipping fluid, but I've been playing around with it for this specific reason, and I think for when I try these guys again, it's definitely something I want to do. Next up, we have the Warp Creature that took a nice bath in some isopropyl alcohol. I feel like that's quite an obvious regret in this miniature, and it's definitely a massive blunder on my part. However, the thing that I actually ended up thinking about later on is the fact that the miniature turned out a little bit too dark, and the lightning itself just doesn't pop as much as I wanted to. I thought about a solution to it for quite some time, and I don't think adding more white paint would have solved it. I think doing something a little bit different with the colors itself, using something a bit more like this, for example, turquoise color, would have helped the lightning quite a bit. Definitely using a slightly desaturated version and just adding a bit more color to this lightning that I think would have worked really well. And beside that, maybe doing something additional with the claws just to make him stand out a little bit more. Next up, we have the suggestion I got for the Chaos Terminators, which was to actually use some decals. At the time, I didn't even realize that I actually had the decals, because apparently they're actually included as part of the Chaos Space Marine kit. And given that the decals aren't too difficult to apply, I did consider adding them later on. However, when I compared the actual decal to the shoulder pad, I quickly realized that because I left my shoulder pad as a metallic color, doing that over it will just make it essentially invisible. And repainting the shoulder pad with black, which I felt like I would just be ruining something that I worked on, and turned out really cool. But if I remember to in the future, I'll definitely be using them. Next up, we have the lore-breaking abomination that is the Primaris Grey Knight. I know it makes absolutely no sense lore-wise, however, it was something I played around with and I thought it turned out really interesting. I was mainly experimenting with a little bit of a weathering technique for the metallic color, and it did turn out a bit more rough than I wanted to. However, the idea for this Kitbashed definitely exists somewhere deep inside this model. I also have absolutely no idea where I found this incredibly comically large purity seal, but all I know is I want to find more of them and just use them on some more models because it's so awesome. I'll maybe have to look into 3D printing and see if I can find some of these just in this very large size. But beside that, the model actually turned out really interesting, minus these handles that, well, they look kind of empty. I think if I used something like, for example, this sword, it could have worked really well. Even just like pushing it against this arm right now, you can get the idea for what this model could be. Maybe even dual wielding with this sword right here. And I actually think there's a Grey Knight model that dual wields as well, and it could be very similar to that. Unfortunately, these parts are incredibly expensive. However, I think if I could find something very similar, it could make this Kitbashed essentially much more interesting than this very strange thing. And finishing things off with my latest Kitbashed, which is these really awesome Black Templars that, frankly, this guy on the left, I think turned out really perfect, and there's nothing I really want to change about him. However, this guy right here, I thought about it afterwards when I finished that guy, that giving him some of these golden shoulder pad trims would have worked really well and just made him look much better. But if I didn't think of something that you think is an obvious fix to any of these models, do let me know. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed a bit more of a casual video this time, and I'll see you next time.